The streets of Manhattan were alive with energy as usual, people rushing by, cabs honking, and the unmistakable hum of the city that never sleeps. It was the kind of hustle that made you forget there was even room for pause in this fast-paced world. But then, something happened that halted everything in its tracks. Donald Trump, the former president, billionaire businessman, and reality TV star, was in town for a high-profile event. His motorcade snaked its way through the busy streets, drawing attention from every corner. Reporters jostled for the perfect shot, and crowds of onlookers gathered, eager for a glimpse of the man who had dominated headlines for years. But amidst all the cameras and whispers, something unusual caught the eye of those watching. Trump's car slowed down as it passed a street corner. A street corner no one had paid much attention to before. There, sitting on the sidewalk, was a woman. She was dressed in ragged clothes, her face weathered by the harsh realities of life on the streets. A cardboard sign beside her read simply, "Please help. Anything helps." For a moment, no one could understand why the motorcade had stopped. Was there a security threat? Was Trump looking for a different route? But no, the car came to a full stop. The driver looked back at Trump, who was already stepping out of the vehicle. "Wait, what's he doing?" someone whispered in the crowd. Trump's towering figure moved past the flashing cameras, and instead of heading toward the event or retreating into the comfort of his security detail, he walked straight toward the woman sitting on the sidewalk. "Is this for real?" a reporter muttered as they fumbled for their cameras. Trump, walking toward a homeless woman? And then, the most shocking thing of all happened. Trump, a man known for his cutthroat business deals and controversial rhetoric, squatted down to talk to her. The world stood still. What would happen next? What would he say to her? Would this be just another publicity stunt? Or was there something more to this moment? The crowd watched in stunned silence as Trump spoke to the woman. People pulled out their phones to record, and whispers spread like wildfire. It wasn't every day that you saw a billionaire former president interact with someone living on the streets. And it definitely wasn't every day that you saw him, a man surrounded by wealth, power, and fame, engage in such a quiet, personal moment in the heart of New York City. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? But there was more to this story than just a random moment of kindness. The encounter that had the world talking was only the beginning of something far greater, a journey of transformation for both the woman on the street and the man whose name was synonymous with wealth and controversy. So, what happens next? Keep reading to find out how a moment of compassion in the midst of the chaos might just lead to the most unexpected and life-changing turn of events. Donald Trump wasn't always the larger-than-life figure the world knew him as. Born in Queens, New York, in 1946, he came from a family of wealth and ambition. His father, Fred Trump, a successful real estate developer, instilled in him the belief that success was not just desirable, it was inevitable. Donald, the fourth of 5 children, was never the quiet, introspective type. He was bold, brash, and determined to carve out a legacy that would surpass even his father's. Trump's rise to fame was no accident. After graduating from the Wharton School of Finance at the University of Pennsylvania, he joined his father's real estate company. But while Fred was focused on building affordable housing in Queens and Brooklyn, Donald had bigger dreams. He set his sights on Manhattan, the heart of New York's luxury market, where he quickly made a name for himself with projects like the Grand Hyatt Hotel and the Trump Tower. With each success, his ego grew, as did his public profile. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a showman, a master at branding, and he knew how to play the media game. Whether it was the booming Trump empire or the flashy casinos in Atlantic City, Trump reveled in the spotlight. His persona became as iconic as the towering buildings he constructed, luxurious, unyielding, and larger than life. But with fame came controversy. His divorce from Ivana Trump in 1992, his bankruptcy filings in the 90s, and his polarizing political views only fueled the narrative that Trump was a man who thrived on drama. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind, regardless of the backlash, and that made him a figure of both admiration and disdain. By the time Trump became the 45th president of the United States in 2017, his name had already become synonymous with wealth, power, and conflict. To many, he was a hero, a businessman who defied the odds and created an empire. To others, he was a villain, an embodiment of everything wrong with the world's obsession with wealth and celebrity. But beneath the surface, there were cracks. The man who seemed so unflappable on the outside had faced his own personal struggles. His path to the top wasn't without sacrifices, and while many saw him as invincible, Trump knew the reality of navigating a world where your every move is scrutinized, criticized, and dissected. Now, let's take a step back from Trump and look at Sarah, the woman sitting on the sidewalk in front of him, who had caught his attention in that fateful moment. Sarah had never imagined she would end up here, sitting on a cold Manhattan sidewalk, begging for change. At 33, she had been living the kind of life most people dreamed of. She had grown up in a middle-class family in Brooklyn, a neighborhood where dreams felt attainable and the future seemed full of promise. She was smart, driven, and had big plans for her life. After high school, Sarah enrolled in college to study social work, eager to make a difference in the world. She even met someone, a man named Mark, who shared her hopes and aspirations. They married young, and for a while, it felt like everything was falling into place. They had a small apartment, a steady income, and a future that seemed certain. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Mark lost his job during the economic downturn, and soon after, their relationship started to unravel. Bills piled up, and their savings dwindled. Sarah tried to hold it together, taking on extra hours at a local coffee shop, but it wasn't enough. The stress of financial strain and emotional strain led to a bitter divorce, and within months, Sarah found herself living on the streets. She didn't have a drug addiction or a history of mental illness, but the weight of everything that had fallen apart was too much to bear. She didn't know where to turn. With no family left to support her and no safety net, Sarah's life descended into a spiral of isolation and despair. Her days were spent navigating the harsh realities of homelessness, hunting for food, surviving the brutal New York winters, and trying to hold on to the little bit of dignity she had left. Every morning, she set up her corner on the busy street and prayed that someone might spare her some change. But even though she was invisible to most, Sarah had dreams. Dreams of starting over, of rebuilding her life from the ground up. She thought about it constantly, but the thought of how to actually make it happen felt so out of reach. She had no job, no connections, and no hope. Until that day, as Sarah sat on the sidewalk, clutching her cardboard sign, she had no idea that her life was about to take a dramatic turn. She had been ignored by countless people that morning, as usual. Most walked by without so much as a glance. But when Trump's motorcade appeared, something in the air changed. It was as if the universe was conspiring to give her one last chance. The moment Donald Trump bent down to speak with Sarah, the world seemed to stop. It wasn't just the usual spectacle of celebrity and power. It was something that hadn't been expected. Trump, an icon of wealth, authority, and unapologetic ambition, was standing face to face with a homeless woman, a woman whose name no one knew, whose story had gone untold. And the crowd, which had been following his every move for years, was now waiting with bated breath for what would happen next. At first, Sarah wasn't sure she had even seen correctly. She blinked, then looked up again. It was him, Donald Trump, the man who owned the tallest buildings in the world, who had made billions in real estate, who had led a country for 4 years. And now, here he was, crouching down on the gritty sidewalk of New York, speaking directly to her. She hadn't been prepared for this. "What's your name?" Trump asked, his voice low but not unfriendly. "Sarah," she muttered, still in shock. I never thought I'd meet someone like you." Trump smiled slightly, though there was something almost sad behind his eyes. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said. "And everyone has a story. What's yours?" For a moment, Sarah hesitated. She had always kept her story close to her chest. The pain of losing her family, the divorce, the days and nights spent on the street. She had buried it deep. She was afraid to open up to a man who had everything when she had nothing. But there was something in his eyes, an understanding that she hadn't expected. She took a deep breath, then started speaking. "I had a good life once," Sarah began, her voice faltering. "I grew up in Brooklyn, went to college. I got married, thought everything was going according to plan. But life doesn't always work out the way you think it will. My husband lost his job, we couldn't pay the bills, and I couldn't handle it. We ended up divorced. And then, everything fell apart. She swallowed hard, trying to hold back tears. I've been here ever since, on the streets, hoping for something to change, but I don't know how. Trump didn't interrupt her. He just listened, his eyes focused on her as she spoke, the crowd around them whispering but unable to drown out her voice. I'm sorry, Trump said finally, his tone shifting from his usual brashness to something quieter, more reflective. That's tough. I've been through my own share of failures. People think it's all easy for me, but it's not. Everyone has their own battles. It was the first time Sarah had heard someone with so much power admit to struggling. She didn't know why it surprised her. It was just the truth, after all. But hearing it from him made her feel, for the first time in a long while, that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this world. The crowd that had gathered around them started to murmur, some clearly puzzled by what was happening. Trump was known for his larger-than-life personality, but here he was, down on a dirty street corner, speaking to someone who didn't have the luxuries of life he did. Some people were taking pictures, others were recording, and a few whispered conspiratorially. Was this some kind of stunt? A new strategy for his next campaign, perhaps? But there was no denying the sincerity in Trump's voice, or the way Sarah's face softened as she listened. Sarah, Trump said, after a long pause, what if I told you there was a way out of this? Not just a handout, but a real chance. Would you take it? Sarah blinked. What do you mean? What kind of chance? Trump stood up slowly, pulling out his wallet. He fumbled through it, as if searching for something specific. Look, he said, holding up a business card. I've got connections, resources, opportunities. I can help you get back on your feet. You've got the drive. I can see that. You just need someone to believe in you. And I do. Sarah's heart raced, her mind spinning. Could this really be happening? Could a man like Donald Trump actually be offering her a lifeline, a chance to rebuild her life? But why me? She asked, her voice trembling. Why would you help someone like me? Trump's gaze softened as he looked down at her. Because everyone deserves a second chance. And because, he paused, looking around at the crowd that had now gathered, waiting for the next chapter of the drama. Because sometimes the world forgets about people like you. And I won't. For a split second, Sarah felt a rush of hope, something she hadn't felt in years. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to grab onto this opportunity, to see if there really was a way out of the darkness. But she couldn't shake the nagging feeling. Was this just another false promise? A fleeting moment of kindness that would evaporate as quickly as it came? She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, a voice called out from the crowd. Is this some kind of stunt, Mr. Trump? What are you trying to pull here? The voice was skeptical, sharp, and came from one of the reporters who had been filming the exchange. The tension in the air thickened instantly. Trump's expression hardened, the familiar public figure re-emerging, the one who didn't back down from criticism. It's not a stunt, he said firmly, turning toward the reporter. This is real. I'm offering help. If you don't like it, that's your problem. But Sarah, now caught in the whirlwind of cameras and questions, felt her heart pound in her chest. The truth was, she didn't know what to make of it either. Was this a genuine offer, or was it just another game to the billionaire businessman? As the reporters pressed closer, asking more questions, Trump glanced at Sarah one last time. Think about it, he said softly, almost as if speaking only to her. I'm not going anywhere, but I'll give you space. You take your time, but don't let this opportunity slip away. And with that, he turned, walked back toward his waiting security detail, and climbed back into his car. The motorcade sped off, but Sarah stood there, stunned, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The crowd began to disperse, but Sarah stayed rooted in place, staring at the business card Trump had left her with. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. But the question remained. Was this offer a chance at a new beginning, or just another empty gesture from a man who thrived on spectacle? The streets of Manhattan felt louder, more chaotic than ever as Sarah stood there, holding the business card in her trembling hands. It was a sharp contrast to the quiet moment that had just passed between her and Trump. The noise around her, people shouting, honking cars, the hum of the city, suddenly seemed distant, muffled. All she could hear was the rapid beating of her heart and the echo of Trump's voice, offering her a chance to change everything. "You've got the drive. I can help you get back on your feet. Everyone deserves a second chance." She couldn't remember how long she'd stood there, lost in her thoughts. She barely noticed the cameras still pointed in her direction, or the curious eyes of onlookers who had begun to disperse after Trump left. In that moment, it felt as though the entire world was watching her, waiting for her to make a decision. Could she really trust him? The question gnawed at her. She had lived through enough disappointment to be skeptical. She knew how the world worked, how it could chew you up and spit you out, especially if you were already down. She had been lied to, ignored, and underestimated so many times before. Was this just another trick, a fleeting moment of kindness for the cameras? Her hands shook as she stared at the business card, the gold lettering glinting in the sunlight. Trump Enterprises was printed boldly across the front, along with a phone number and an email address. He hadn't promised her riches, but the opportunity. He had spoken of resources, connections, a way out. But could someone like Donald Trump really care about a woman like her? A homeless woman who had nothing? There was so much distance between them, so many layers of wealth, privilege, and power that separated them. Would he really follow through? Or was he just playing another part in a world full of soundbites and headlines? "Don't let this opportunity slip away," he had said. But the hesitation was real. Sarah wasn't naive. She knew how quickly people could move on from moments like this. How, once the cameras were gone, so too might the promises be. She looked around at the bustling city streets. This was where she'd lived for years now, where she had learned how to survive, no matter how hard it got. The streets had become her home, in a sense, and it was all she knew. And yet, as she stood there, an unexpected feeling began to take root. It was something unfamiliar, hope. For so long, she had told herself that survival was enough, that getting by was the best she could hope for. But today, in the midst of the madness, Trump had offered her a glimpse of something more, a real chance, or at least the possibility of one. The question was whether she was ready to seize it. Back in his limousine, Trump leaned back against the leather seats, his eyes closed as the vehicle sped through the crowded streets. The sound of the city outside seemed to fade as he tried to process what had just happened. He was no stranger to controversy, but this was different. He had made a decision in the moment, driven by a mix of instincts. Perhaps it was the raw honesty in Sarah's eyes, or maybe it was something else entirely. But he knew that he had done the right thing, at least in that moment. Offering her help, in whatever form it took, had felt like the only thing he could do. After all, wasn't it part of his brand? His image as a man who built things, who fixed problems, who made things great again. But as the motorcade moved forward, Trump couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that followed him. The media would spin this moment. They would twist it into something it wasn't. Was he doing this to look good? Was this a publicity stunt, as some had suggested? Or was there something more genuine at play? His mind raced, turning over the idea of Sarah's story. Her struggle resonated with him in a way he hadn't anticipated. Perhaps it was because, despite his wealth and success, he knew what it felt like to have everything fall apart, to lose it all and have to rebuild. Maybe, just maybe, this would be his way of giving something back, of proving that, despite his reputation, he wasn't just a businessman, but a man capable of compassion. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the suspicion that this offer of help, however sincere, would be met with cynicism. People wouldn't understand. The critics would come for him, just as they always did. Would anyone believe he was genuinely trying to make a difference? Would Sarah even trust him after everything she had been through? Back on the street, Sarah continued to stare at the card, her thoughts tumbling over each other like a river that had finally broken free of its banks. Could she really trust him? Could she trust anyone anymore? She turned the card over and over in her hands, her fingers grazing the smooth edges. There was a part of her that wanted to pick up the phone right now, dial the number, and take the first step towards something different. But then there was another part. one that reminded her of all the failed promises she had encountered in her life. People who had told her they would help, only to disappear the moment things got tough. She had learned, through the years, to rely only on herself. As she stood there, she felt the weight of it all. Her options had always been limited: fight to survive, or give up completely. This offer, though, it felt different. It felt like more than just a handout. But was she ready for it? What if it's real? The thought lingered. What if it was the one thing that could finally change her life? But the doubt was still there, creeping in. She wasn't a fool. She knew how the world worked. A moment like this could easily vanish, leaving her empty again, with nothing but a memory and a false hope. As she turned to walk back to her corner, the decision still hanging in the air, a familiar voice called out, "Sarah?" A woman's voice, soft but persistent. Sarah turned to find another homeless woman, Maya, who had been living on the streets almost as long as Sarah had. They had spoken a few times over the years, sharing stories of hardship, of survival. Maya's eyes were sharp, knowing. "Are you okay?" Maya asked, glancing at the card in Sarah's hand. "What's that?" It's from Donald Trump," Sarah said, the words sounding strange even as she said them. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Trump? The guy who owns half of New York? What's he want with you?" "I don't know," Sarah replied, feeling conflicted. "He says he can help me." Maya studied her carefully. "Listen, girl, I know you're tired. We all are. But if you're thinking about taking that offer, you better be careful. People like him don't do things for free. They always want something in return." Sarah hesitated, unsure. Maya's warning echoed in her mind. Was it really a chance to change her life? Or was it a trap waiting to spring? The next few days felt like a blur for Sarah. The city, once so familiar and predictable, now seemed alien to her. Every corner, every face, felt as though it was waiting for her to make a decision, to take action. And every time she reached into her pocket and felt the business card, her anxiety grew. What if I'm making a mistake? She spent the entire night turning the card over and over in her hand. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Trump had looked at her, like he saw something in her that others didn't. There was a rawness to his eyes that made her believe, for just a moment, that he was serious. But then, Maya's warning echoed in her mind. People like him don't do things for free. They always want something in return. The question had become impossible to avoid. Was this offer real? Or was she just another pawn in someone's game? If she called him, would she be stepping into a world that she couldn't control? Or could this be the break she had been waiting for, the chance to escape the streets and rebuild her life? Meanwhile, Donald Trump was already facing the fallout from his impromptu act of kindness. As much as he had hoped it would be a genuine gesture, a moment of real connection, the media had other ideas. As soon as the news broke that Trump had spoken to a homeless woman on the streets of Manhattan, it became the latest viral sensation. The headlines were everywhere. Some applauded him for reaching out to someone in need, calling it a moment of human decency, but many more were skeptical. Criticisms poured in, questioning his true intentions. "Is Trump trying to make himself a hero?" one headline read. "Trump's latest stunt, helping the homeless or just chasing headlines?" another questioned. Even some of his staunchest supporters were divided. There was no doubt that Trump's image was carefully constructed. Every word, every action, scrutinized and calculated. Could this be another performance? Was he really trying to help? Or was this just a way to score points with the media, to build a narrative of compassion in an era where his brand was often seen as cold and ruthless? Trump sat in his office at Trump Tower, staring at the news coverage on his laptop. The skepticism didn't surprise him. It never did. But what bothered him was the realization that people had completely misunderstood his motivation. It wasn't a stunt. It wasn't about media attention. He had seen something in Sarah's eyes, something he couldn't ignore. "I just want to help her," he thought. "It's not about the press. It's about giving someone a chance." He picked up his phone and dialed the number he had given Sarah. The phone rang once, twice, before going to voicemail. He hung up, a bit disappointed, but not deterred. He didn't expect her to call right away. After all, she was probably just as skeptical as the rest of the world. But then his phone buzzed again, and he looked down to see a new message, this one from a journalist, asking for a statement about his homeless outreach. He exhaled, frustrated. He wasn't interested in talking to reporters about this. He wasn't playing a game. He just wanted to help Sarah, but the moment he tried, it was already being spun into something else. Back on the streets, Sarah had still not made a decision. Her thoughts were a constant tug-of-war. Every time she felt ready to make the call, the doubts would creep in. She had been homeless for nearly 2 years now. Could she really go back to a life where she had a home, a job, a future? The idea felt almost like a fantasy, a dream so far removed from her current reality. But I can't keep living like this, she thought. I'm tired. So tired. The next morning, after another long night spent on the cold sidewalk, Sarah found herself standing in front of a small cafe, a place she often passed by but had never dared to enter. The rich smell of coffee and fresh pastries wafted out the door, tempting her. For a moment, she considered going inside, buying a warm drink to ease the chill in her bones. But she didn't have enough money. She never did. She sighed and stepped back, resigned to another day of scrounging for whatever she could get. As she walked past the cafe, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and was surprised to see Maya approaching. The older woman's eyes were full of something more than curiosity. They were concerned, almost pleading. "Sarah, you need to think this through," Maya said, grabbing her by the arm. "This isn't just about a card, or a man who gives you a little hope. It's about your life. You're not just some charity case to be saved. You understand? You're a person. And if you go into this, you better know what you're getting into." Sarah winced at the harshness in Maya's voice. "I know, but I don't know what else to do. I've been stuck here for so long. I don't know if I can keep doing this. What if it's my chance to get out?" Maya studied her for a long moment, then sighed deeply. "I'm not saying you shouldn't take the opportunity, but you better be ready for what comes next. Nothing in this world is free. You think he's doing this because he's some kind of saint? No, he wants something. Everyone does. And don't get your hopes up too high. People don't change overnight." The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She had been so focused on what Trump had said, on the promise of a new life, that she hadn't fully considered the implications. She didn't want to become someone's project. She didn't want to owe anyone anything, especially not a man like him. But deep down, there was a part of her that was still clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be the thing that finally turned her life around. Back at Trump Tower, the phone rang again. This time, it was Sarah. Trump's heart skipped a beat as he picked up. "Sarah?" "Hi, Mr. Trump." Sarah's voice was quiet, hesitant. "It's me. I've been thinking about your offer. I don't know what to expect, or if you really mean it, but I think I need to try." Trump smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "Of course I mean it. I'm here to help. Just let me know what you need." "I don't even know where to start," Sarah admitted. "I don't know if I can trust this, or if it's just another empty promise. But I can't stay here. I can't live on the street anymore." "You won't have to," Trump said firmly. "I'll make sure you have a place to stay, food to eat, and a way to get back on your feet. But you have to be ready for change. It's not going to be easy, but I'll be with you every step of the way." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. This could be it. This could be the opportunity she had been waiting for. But what's the catch? She couldn't shake that doubt. "I'm ready," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm ready to try." As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. There was still uncertainty, still fear, but for the first time in a long time, there was also hope. The future was uncertain, but she had made a decision. She was going to take the chance. And for better or worse, she would find out soon enough what it would really cost her. The days following Sarah's call to Trump were a whirlwind of activity and emotions. The promise of a fresh start, a chance to leave the streets behind, was tantalizing, but with it came the looming questions of what that would truly mean for her. Was she ready for a world that was so far removed from the struggle she knew? Could she navigate the new world that Trump was offering her without losing herself in the process? That afternoon, a black SUV pulled up to the corner of 53rd Street, the same spot where Sarah had spent countless nights huddled under a thin blanket, watching the world rush by. She stood, arms crossed tightly against her chest, her heart beating faster as the car came to a stop. The tinted windows rolled down, revealing a well-dressed man in his mid-30s who smiled politely at her. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Yeah," she said, nodding. Are you here for me?" The man stepped out of the car, holding a clipboard. "I'm David. Mr. Trump sent me. He's arranged for everything. We've got a place for you to stay, and we'll be handling all the logistics. You're not going to have to worry about a thing." The words hit her like a wave. She hadn't expected it to be this smooth, this quick. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite shake. The opportunity was here, but was it really hers to take? "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice a little unsteady. David smiled again, but this time it seemed more rehearsed. "We've got a hotel lined up for you. You'll be comfortable, safe. From there, we can discuss the next steps, getting you some clothes, maybe even a job interview, depending on your skills and interests." The mention of a hotel made Sarah hesitate. She hadn't stayed in a hotel in years. She had lived in shelters, on the streets, and in the back corners of alleyways. This was a different world, a world she hadn't allowed herself to dream about in a long time. As they drove through the city, Sarah's thoughts spun. She couldn't deny the relief she felt, but she also couldn't ignore the gnawing uncertainty. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown. It was the fear of being let down. Trump had given her an opportunity, but what did he want in return? Was there a hidden agenda behind his offer? Back at Trump Tower, Trump sat at his desk, reviewing a stack of documents related to his latest projects. His phone buzzed, and he picked it up, seeing David's name on the screen. "David, what's the situation?" Trump asked, his voice steady, but there was an undertone of something else, something like anticipation. "She's on her way to the hotel now. Everything's been arranged. She seems a bit nervous, but I think she'll adjust. I've got everything ready for her, a comfortable room, food, basic needs covered. She'll be fine." Trump leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the armrest. He wasn't used to offering help like this, at least not in the way he was now. It wasn't about money or power. It was something else, something that felt rawer, more personal. He couldn't explain it, but he had made a commitment to Sarah, and he wasn't about to back down. "Good. Keep me posted. Let me know if she needs anything," Trump said. He paused for a moment. "David, make sure she understands. This isn't charity. She's going to have to work for what she gets. Nothing's free, but I'm willing to invest in her if she's willing to invest in herself." David's voice came through the line, cool and professional. "Understood, sir. I'll make sure she knows." As Sarah entered the hotel, she was immediately struck by how different it felt from everything she had known. The lobby was vast and grand, with marble floors and a chandelier that seemed to glitter like the stars above. The air smelled faintly of roses and fresh linens. It was luxurious in a way that almost made her uncomfortable. "Welcome to the Hilton," a receptionist greeted her with a warm smile, though Sarah barely registered the words. She was too distracted by the opulence of her surroundings. She felt out of place here, like a character in someone else's story. David led her to an elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. As the elevator doors slid closed, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the polished metal. She looked tired, worn down. Her clothes were frayed, her hair messy from days of traveling on foot. She was no longer the young woman who had walked the streets of New York with a sense of pride. She was someone else entirely. But perhaps that would change soon. The elevator stopped, and they walked down a long hallway to a door at the end. David unlocked it with a keycard, opening the door to a suite that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. The room was massive, bigger than any apartment she had ever seen. The bed was huge, the kind you only saw in movies. There were fresh flowers on the coffee table, a desk with a sleek, modern computer, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city. It was nothing like the shelters or alleyways she had spent her nights in. This was real comfort, luxury, the kind of place people stayed when they had made it. "This is your room for the night," David said, walking in behind her. "There's a wardrobe full of clothes waiting for you. We'll have a stylist come by later to help you choose something for tomorrow. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the next steps. But for now, just rest. Take a shower. Relax." Sarah turned slowly, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. Just take care of yourself tonight. This is a new start for you, David said, his voice soothing. And don't worry, we'll make sure everything's in place. You just focus on getting back on your feet. The door closed behind him, leaving Sarah alone in the room. She stood in the middle of the suite, uncertain of what to do next. A part of her wanted to dive into the luxury, to embrace this strange, beautiful world. But another part of her felt like an imposter, like she didn't belong here. How did I end up here? She wondered, staring out at the skyline of the city that had both defined and discarded her. As she sank onto the plush bed, a wave of exhaustion hit her like a freight train. She had been running for so long, fighting to survive. She hadn't allowed herself to stop, to rest, to think. Now, here she was, with everything she needed to rebuild her life, except for the certainty that she was ready to do it. Back in Trump Tower, Trump sat in his office, glancing out at the New York skyline. He couldn't help but think about Sarah, about the possibility of helping her turn her life around. He had been successful at many things, business, politics, real estate, but this felt different. This was personal. What if she doesn't take the opportunity? What if she fails? He thought. The risk was there, no matter what, but he had already made the decision. And no matter what happened, he wouldn't back down. Sarah lay in the hotel room, staring up at the ceiling. The weight of it all was still heavy on her shoulders. She had a chance. This was her shot. But could she really take it? Could she trust Trump? And more importantly, could she trust herself to not let the past drag her down again? Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new challenges. But tonight, all she could do was breathe and allow herself the luxury of a moment of rest. For the first time in a long time, she could almost imagine a different life. A life that was hers, not the one she had been given by the world. And maybe, just maybe, that life was within reach. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. What do you think Sarah will do next? Can she embrace this new opportunity, or will she remain hesitant? The sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a soft, golden glow over the luxurious hotel suite. Sarah awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside, a far cry from the noisy streets she had left behind. Her body felt heavy from exhaustion, but it was a different kind of tiredness, one that came from an emotional battle rather than physical strain. She lay there for a moment, staring up at the ceiling, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The silence in the room was deafening, the kind of silence that made her question everything. Was this all real? Was she really given this chance? Or was it just a temporary escape, a brief interlude before reality pulled her back into its harsh grip? The night before had been surreal. The lavish bed, the fluffy white towels, the view of New York City from the windows. All of it had felt like a dream. It was the kind of life she had always imagined, but never believed she would have. A life of comfort, of security, of hope. Yet, as she lay there, the weight of uncertainty grew heavier. She could feel the ghosts of her past lurking just outside the door, waiting to pull her back. Years of struggle, of surviving on the streets, had taught her to be wary of things that seemed too good to be true. This was no different. Suddenly, a knock at the door broke her thoughts. "Sarah?" A voice called through the door. It was David. "I'm here to help you get started for the day. Are you ready?" Sarah sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. "Yeah, I'll be right out." She took a deep breath and stood up. The cold floor beneath her feet felt like a reminder that she wasn't entirely free yet. She was still tethered to her past, and no matter how soft the bed or how bright the lights, she couldn't shake the fear that it could all slip away at any moment. David greeted her with a smile when she opened the door. He looked just as polished as he had the day before, a stark contrast to her disheveled appearance. "Good morning," he said, his tone professional but warm. "I hope you slept well. We've got a full day ahead, so let's get you ready." Sarah nodded, still feeling somewhat out of place. "Okay," she said, forcing a smile. "What's the plan?" David gestured toward a nearby wardrobe. "First things first, clothes. We've arranged for a stylist to come by. You'll have a few options for outfits, and we'll figure out what works best for you." Sarah followed him into the living area of the suite, where a full wardrobe stood ready with neatly hung garments. There were dresses, suits, blouses, and pants, all high-end brands that she had never touched before, let alone tried on. "Wow," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know where to start." David smiled. "That's why we have a stylist. Don't worry, she'll take care of everything." A few moments later, a woman in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, entered the room. Her name was Lena, and she wasted no time getting to work. Lena spoke quickly and confidently, moving from one garment to the next as she assessed Sarah's size and style. In what felt like no time at all, Sarah found herself slipping into an elegant black dress, its fabric hugging her form in ways she had never experienced. "Perfect," Lena said as she adjusted the hem of the dress. "You look fantastic. Now, let's get your hair done." As Sarah looked at her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The transformation was nothing short of dramatic. Her wild, unkempt hair was now styled in soft waves, and her face, which had once been marked by the harshness of street life, now appeared more refreshed, glowing even. This is a lot," Sarah said softly, still absorbing the changes. "You look incredible," David said with a genuine smile. "Now, let's head to lunch. Mr. Trump wants to meet with you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Trump's name. She hadn't heard from him since the night he had given her the card. The thought of seeing him face to face again made her nervous. Would she live up to the image he had of her? Would she even be able to speak to him without making a fool of herself? "You're doing great," David reassured her, noticing her unease. "Just relax. It's all about taking one step at a time." The drive to Trump Tower felt surreal. Sarah sat in the back of the car, watching the streets of New York flash by. She had lived here for years, but this was different. This was the world of the powerful, the wealthy, the world she had always been on the outskirts of, looking in. Now, she was about to enter it, with no idea of what to expect. When they arrived, David escorted Sarah to a private elevator, which whisked them up to a lavish floor that seemed to stretch endlessly. The elevator doors opened into a grand foyer, where a large portrait of Donald Trump himself loomed over them. His familiar face was stoic, as if silently judging her every move. "Mr. Trump is expecting you," David said, his tone now serious. "He's in his office. Follow me." Sarah's heart raced as she walked down the long hallway. Her nerves were palpable, but she tried to calm herself. She had made it this far, hadn't she? She was already stepping into the unknown. The only thing left to do was walk forward. The door to Trump's office opened, and there he was, Donald Trump, standing in front of his desk, his broad frame filling the space. He was dressed in his usual suit, but today there was something different in his demeanor. He didn't look like the businessman or the media mogul. Today, he looked like someone who was ready to make something happen, something big. "Sarah," he said, extending a hand. His voice was warm, and there was no trace of the cold, calculating businessman she had seen on TV. He was different now. "I'm glad to see you've arrived." She shook his hand, trying not to let the shaking in her palms show. "Thank you for everything." I don't know how to thank you." Trump smiled and motioned for her to sit. "No need for thanks yet. We're just getting started. This is about you, Sarah. This is about what you can do with the opportunity we're giving you." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "But you should know something. This isn't a charity. This is a partnership. If you want to succeed, you'll need to work for it. You'll have the resources and the support, but you're going to have to put in the effort. And there will be tests along the way. I want to see how you handle pressure, how you make decisions when it matters most. You'll be faced with choices, difficult choices, and I'll be watching how you handle them." The weight of his words settled on her like a stone. She nodded slowly, swallowing her nerves. "I understand. I won't let you down." Trump looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Good. I'm counting on you, Sarah. Let's get to work." As the meeting ended, Sarah left Trump's office feeling both inspired and overwhelmed. She had expected something different, maybe something more casual. But Trump's words were clear. He wasn't offering her charity. This was a challenge, a test. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be her path to walk. As she stepped out of Trump Tower and into the bustling streets of Manhattan once more, Sarah knew one thing for sure. She was no longer the woman who had arrived just a few days ago. The world was different now, and so was she. The only question was, could she live up to what Trump expected of her? The weight of Trump's words lingered in Sarah's mind long after she left his office. "This isn't a charity. This is a partnership," he had said, his voice steady and commanding. But what did that really mean for her? He had given her a chance, but he hadn't promised anything beyond that. The world Trump was offering her wasn't just a second chance. It was a high-stakes game, one where failure was not an option. As she walked out of Trump Tower, the hum of the city seemed louder than ever. The streets were crowded with people rushing from one place to another, their faces masked with the indifference of the everyday grind. But Sarah wasn't part of that crowd anymore. Or at least, she wasn't supposed to be. Her life was about to change. The question was, could she handle the pressure? The following days passed in a blur. Sarah was thrust into a world of meetings, appointments, and decisions. Each day was a new challenge, a new test of her resolve. Trump had provided her with the resources, luxurious clothing, a sleek apartment, a personal assistant, but it was clear that none of it would matter if she couldn't meet the expectations that came with it. It was David who was there to guide her, although his guidance often felt more like a series of tasks and assignments than mentorship. "You're meeting with a potential employer today," he informed her one afternoon, his tone businesslike. "I've arranged a lunch with a contact of Mr. Trump's. He owns a construction company, and he's looking for a project manager. He's got connections to some of Trump's developments, so this could be a great opportunity for you." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. A project manager? She had spent years surviving, not managing. The idea of stepping into a leadership role felt alien. She had never held a formal job in her life, let alone been asked to run a project for a multimillion-dollar business. What if she messed it up? What if she wasn't cut out for this? But Trump had given her a chance, and that meant she had to take it. There was no turning back now. The restaurant where they were meeting was upscale, but it wasn't quite the same level as the luxury Sarah had been experiencing in Trump Tower. It was a quieter place, with dim lighting and plush leather booths. The man she was supposed to meet was already there when Sarah arrived. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit, with a sharp, calculating look in his eyes. "Sarah, right?" he asked, standing up as she approached. "I'm Nathan." Sarah extended her hand, doing her best to smile. "Yes, Nathan. It's a pleasure to meet you." They sat down, and the conversation started off smoothly. Nathan talked about his company, the potential for expansion, and how he was looking for someone with the right drive to help him take things to the next level. Sarah listened intently, nodding along as he spoke, but inside, her mind raced. Was she really the right person for this job? Could she manage a team? Could she run a business? Eventually, Nathan leaned in, his eyes narrowing slightly. "So, tell me a little more about your experience. I hear you've been working with Mr. Trump?" Sarah hesitated. The truth was, she didn't have any real experience to speak of. She had spent most of her adult life just getting by, fighting for survival. But that wasn't the answer she could give him. "I've been learning," she said, her voice steady but unsure. "I've been learning a lot, actually. Mr. Trump believes in me, and he's giving me a chance to prove myself. I'm eager to work hard and make things happen. I'm ready to take on the challenge." Nathan studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Sarah held her breath, hoping she hadn't said something wrong. "I like your attitude," he said finally. "But it's not just about attitude, Sarah. It's about results. Mr. Trump might believe in you, but I need to see that you can handle the pressure, that you can make tough decisions when it counts." The words hit her like a punch in the gut. She could feel the pressure mounting already, the weight of the expectations pressing down on her shoulders. But there was no backing out. Not now. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Nathan asked more questions, probing deeper into her experience and her skills. Sarah tried to stay focused, but the nagging voice in her head kept reminding her of her inadequacies. She didn't have the qualifications. She didn't have the experience. She was just a homeless woman who had been given a chance to change her life. What if she wasn't cut out for it? When the meeting finally ended, Sarah felt a mix of relief and dread. Nathan hadn't said anything definitive, but his words had left a mark. She could tell he was still on the fence, unsure whether she was the right person for the job. David was waiting for her outside the restaurant when the meeting wrapped up. His face was unreadable as he walked alongside her. "How did it go?" he asked casually. "I think it went okay," Sarah replied, trying to sound confident. "I told him I'm ready to work hard. I don't know if he's convinced, though." David nodded. "It's a start. Don't worry about it too much. You'll get more chances. But you need to show them that you can handle the pressure. That's what it's all about in this world. Handling pressure." Sarah didn't respond. She was lost in thought, replaying the conversation over and over in her mind. Could she handle it? Could she actually rise to the challenge? Later that evening, back at her apartment, Sarah couldn't shake the weight of the day. She had been thrust into a world that was completely alien to her, one of expectations, pressure, and constant evaluation. And every step of the way, she felt like she was walking a tightrope, terrified of falling off. As she sat at her kitchen table, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Trump. "Sarah, good work today. Nathan was impressed with your determination, but he's looking for someone who can take charge and think on their feet. This isn't going to be easy. I need to know if you're really ready for this. If you want it, you have to prove it. You'll have more tests to face. Don't back down." She read the message again and again, trying to let the words sink in. This was the moment. Trump was testing her, pushing her to her limits, and she couldn't afford to fail. But what if she wasn't enough? What if, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't live up to his expectations? The next morning, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the message again. The uncertainty gnawed at her, but the reality was clear. She had to move forward. She couldn't afford to doubt herself now. Today, she would prove that she was worthy of the opportunity Trump had given her. She would prove that she could rise above her past and take control of her future. There was no more room for fear, no more room for hesitation. She would do whatever it took to succeed. The days that followed the meeting with Nathan felt like a blur. Each morning, Sarah woke up early, her heart pounding with the weight of everything she had to prove. There was no going back now. The path that Trump had set before her was narrow, filled with obstacles, but there was no turning off the road. She had to keep moving forward, no matter how uncertain or overwhelming it seemed. The pressure she was under felt suffocating at times. There was always something new to learn, someone new to meet, a new challenge to face. Trump wasn't handing her any easy passes. Every interaction, every conversation was another test, and each test felt more difficult than the last. That afternoon, Sarah was summoned to another meeting at Trump Tower. Her stomach twisted with a mix of anticipation and anxiety as David briefed her on what was to come. "This is big, Sarah," David said, his expression serious. "Mr. Trump's contacts are pushing hard for you to step up. They want to see what you're made of. This isn't just about answering questions anymore. It's about taking charge and showing them that you can handle the big leagues." Sarah swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. Taking charge. The words echoed in her mind, but they felt like a foreign language. She had spent years simply surviving, managing to get by with the bare minimum. She had never been in a position where she had to take the lead. The thought of it made her stomach churn. "Okay," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll do my best." The meeting was with a high-profile investor named Gregory Collins, someone who had his fingers in nearly every major development project in the city. Collins was known for being a shrewd businessman, and his reputation was intimidating. He was expecting Sarah to prove that she could be an asset to his ventures, but the stakes felt higher than ever. As she walked into the sleek conference room at Trump Tower, Sarah felt the walls closing in. Gregory Collins stood by the window, overlooking the city, his back to her. He turned when she entered, a practiced smile on his face. "Sarah," he said, his voice smooth, yet with an edge of skepticism. "Good to meet you." She shook his hand, doing her best to maintain eye contact. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Collins." They sat across from each other at the long, polished conference table, and the conversation began. At first, it was polite, basic introductions, small talk about the weather, business trends in the city. But soon, the questions started coming faster. "I hear you've been working with Mr. Trump for a short time now," Collins said, studying her intently. "Tell me about what you've learned so far. What's your vision for your future with this partnership?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. She had prepared, but now the pressure felt like a weight too heavy to bear. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. "I've learned a lot," she began, her voice a little unsteady. "I've learned that success doesn't come easy. It requires hard work, dedication, and the ability to make tough decisions under pressure. Mr. Trump has given me a chance to prove myself, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes to succeed." Collins nodded, but his gaze was still calculating. "Hard work is important, yes? But what else? What's your plan? You're going to have to lead teams, make strategic choices, deal with people who will question your decisions. How do you handle that kind of pressure?" The question hit her like a wave. Sarah's mind raced. She didn't have a concrete answer. She couldn't lie and say that she had experience managing people. The truth was, she was learning on the fly, trying to figure it out as she went along. But she couldn't let them see her doubt. "I believe in taking things one step at a time," she said slowly. "I don't have all the answers right now, but I know that I'm willing to work hard, learn fast, and take responsibility for my decisions. I'm not afraid to make mistakes, as long as I learn from them." Collins leaned back in his chair, considering her response. Sarah held her breath, praying that she hadn't said something wrong. "You know," Collins said after a pause, "I've met a lot of people who say they're willing to learn, but very few actually do. You're saying the right things, but we'll see if you can back it up. I need to know if you can deliver results." His words were like a punch to the gut. Results. That was what it always came down to. Nothing else mattered. Not the struggles she had been through. Not the hard work she had put in. Results were the only thing that counted in this world, and she wasn't sure she could deliver. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Sarah was asked more questions, each one feeling more difficult than the last. By the time the meeting ended, her mind was exhausted, her confidence shaken. She had answered as best as she could, but she didn't know if it was enough. David was waiting for her when she stepped out of the conference room. His face was unreadable, and he fell into step beside her as they walked toward the elevator. "How'd it go?" he asked. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice low. "I don't think I did enough. I don't think I'm cut out for this." David gave her a reassuring glance. "You did fine, Sarah. He's a tough guy to impress, but you're on the right track. It's just a matter of showing him you can handle the pressure." "Can I handle it?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. "I don't know if I can. This is all too much. I've never been in a position like this before. What if I fail?" David didn't answer immediately, but his silence spoke volumes. She could tell he understood her fear. But then, he spoke, his voice steady and calm. "Fear is natural," he said. "Everyone feels it, but you can't let it control you. You've come too far to back down now. The hardest part is pushing through when it feels like you're about to break. That's the real test, and I believe you're strong enough to pass it." That night, Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, doubts, and fears. She had spent so much of her life surviving, just trying to make it through the day. But now, she was being asked to step up, to lead, to make decisions that could change everything. Could she really do this? Could she really handle the pressure of this world? Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the silence. She grabbed it, half expecting it to be another message from Trump or David. It was a message from Trump. "Sarah, you've got what it takes. Keep pushing forward. This isn't going to be easy, but you're more than capable. The real challenge comes when you think you've reached your breaking point. That's when you show them who you really are." She stared at the message, her heart pounding. The real challenge comes when you think you've reached your breaking point. She didn't know if she was strong enough for this. But one thing was clear. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. Tomorrow would be another test, another opportunity to prove herself. And this time, she wasn't going to let fear hold her back. The next morning came too quickly for Sarah. The weight of the previous day's meeting with Gregory Collins still sat heavily on her shoulders. Trump's message had given her some reassurance, but the lingering doubt remained. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking a fine line, balancing between success and failure. Was she truly ready to face the world she was being thrust into, or was it all just too much? Sarah stood in front of her closet that morning, her hands trembling as she selected her outfit. The polished, Professional clothes she had once viewed as unattainable now felt like a mask. She had to wear them, but beneath them, she still felt like the same woman who had once slept in a shelter, scraping by from day to day. The luxury surrounding her felt foreign, and every time she glanced in the mirror, she saw a stranger staring back. The phone buzzed on the dresser, breaking her thoughts. It was another message from David. "Sarah, I've scheduled a meeting for you today at Trump Tower. You'll be discussing a potential project. This is a chance to really show what you're made of. Don't overthink it. Just be yourself and remember, you've got this. Be yourself." The words sounded simple, but the pressure was anything but. She had spent most of her life just surviving. Now, she was being asked to thrive, to lead, to make decisions that could impact lives and businesses. There was no room for mistakes. She took a deep breath, forced herself to calm her nerves, and put on her coat. There was no turning back now. The meeting at Trump Tower was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. When she arrived in the lobby, the marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, the chandeliers sparkling like diamonds overhead. The towering walls of glass reflected the skyline, and she couldn't help but feel small in the face of so much opulence. This was the world she was being thrust into, an intimidating world, one where every move counted, every word weighed. David was waiting for her in the lobby, as usual, his expression unreadable. "Ready?" he asked, his voice steady. "As ready as I can be," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. They rode the elevator up to the 26th floor, where the meeting was scheduled. The space was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. The conference room was sleek and modern, with a long glass table in the center and high-backed chairs surrounding it. At the table sat a group of men and women, all dressed in designer suits, their expressions sharp and focused. Among them was Trump, his ever-present confidence radiating off him as he stood by the window, talking to a couple of his associates. "Sarah," David said, gesturing toward her, "this is your moment." Trump turned around, his gaze landing on her. For a split second, Sarah felt as if the entire room was staring at her, waiting for her to do something, anything, to prove that she belonged in this space. "Glad you could make it," Trump said, his voice smooth but authoritative. "Let's get down to business." The meeting began with introductions, as always. Trump's associates spoke about various projects they were working on, discussing real estate developments, investments, and partnerships. Sarah listened intently, trying to absorb everything, though it felt like her mind was racing in 1,000 different directions. She had no experience with any of this. Real estate, construction, high-stakes investments. These were worlds she had never navigated. And yet, somehow, she was supposed to be a part of it now. Finally, Trump turned his attention to her. "Sarah, I'd like you to weigh in," he said, his tone casual but firm. "You've been working hard. I see that. You've made a good impression. What's your take on the direction we should be heading with this project?" The room fell silent. All eyes were on her. For a brief moment, panic set in. What could she possibly say? She wasn't an expert. She wasn't qualified. She felt like an imposter. But then, something shifted within her. Maybe it was the confidence she had seen in Trump's eyes when he looked at her, or maybe it was the realization that she had no choice but to try. She had to take this opportunity. She had to step up. Sarah took a deep breath and stood taller. She scanned the room, gathering her thoughts. "I think the direction is solid," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. "But I'd recommend we focus on sustainable development. The future of real estate isn't just about luxury. People are increasingly interested in eco-friendly, energy-efficient living spaces. If we integrate green technologies into this project, we could not only set ourselves apart in the market, but we could also be part of a growing trend that aligns with environmental concerns." She paused, feeling the eyes of the room on her. She had no idea if that was the right approach, but it felt like something that could resonate with the group. The moment hung in the air, tension building as everyone waited for Trump's reaction. Trump looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. And then, just when Sarah thought she might pass out from the pressure, he nodded. "That's a solid idea," he said, his tone approving. "Sustainability is the future. I like that." The room seemed to relax slightly, and Sarah let out a quiet breath. For the first time since entering the room, she felt a small flicker of confidence. Maybe she wasn't so out of place after all. The meeting continued with more discussions, but Sarah had found her footing. She contributed where she could, offering suggestions and asking questions. Slowly, she started to feel like she was part of the conversation, not just an outsider looking in. As the meeting wrapped up, Trump turned to her again. "You've got some good ideas, Sarah. Keep pushing forward. You're proving yourself." His words were more than just praise. They were validation. They were the acknowledgement that she belonged here, that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. When the meeting ended, Sarah walked out of the conference room, her mind spinning. She had done it. She had actually contributed to a real conversation in a room full of experts, and Trump had recognized it. David met her in the hallway, his usual stoic expression softening just slightly. "Well done," he said. "You held your own in there." "I can't believe it," Sarah replied, her voice a mixture of disbelief and relief. "I actually did it. I contributed. I didn't mess it up." David smiled. "You didn't mess it up, Sarah. You did exactly what you needed to do. You've got potential. Don't forget that." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt like maybe, just maybe, she had what it took to succeed in this world. She wasn't just a woman plucked from the streets. She was someone who could make a difference, who could rise to the occasion. But as she stepped into the elevator, the buzz of accomplishment slowly faded. There was still more to prove. One meeting wouldn't change everything. She couldn't let herself get too comfortable. Trump had given her a chance, but the road ahead was still long, and she knew there would be more challenges, bigger tests of her resolve. Could she keep rising, or would the weight of her past pull her back down? Only time would tell. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The events of the past few weeks had been a whirlwind. She had learned so much, accomplished more than she had ever imagined, and had finally started to feel like she was part of something bigger. But the thrill of success was always tempered by a gnawing sense of unease. It was as though she were walking a tightrope, one misstep away from falling into the abyss. The morning after her breakthrough at Trump Tower, Sarah woke up to a message from David. "Meet me at Trump Tower in an hour. We need to discuss some changes." Changes. The word echoed in her mind as she dressed quickly, her stomach twisting into knots. What changes? Had something gone wrong? She replayed her meeting in her head, wondering if she had said something that had made her progress a fluke. Had she overestimated her place in this world? Arriving at the tower, Sarah tried to steady her breath. The lobby felt colder today. Perhaps it was just her nerves, but it seemed as if the once comforting gleam of the marble floors now reminded her of how out of place she felt. She was here, but was she truly accepted? Was she really going to succeed? David was already waiting for her in the conference room. He didn't look up from his phone when she entered, his face as unreadable as always. She hesitated before taking a seat across from him. "What's going on, David?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. David finally glanced up, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something, perhaps concern, maybe frustration, in his eyes. He set the phone down and folded his hands. "We have a problem," he said, his tone flat. "A problem? What kind of problem?" "Your recent performance has drawn attention, Sarah. People are starting to take notice." His voice didn't carry the enthusiasm she had hoped for. Instead, it was heavy with something else. "But not everyone is happy about it." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean? I thought I did well." "I thought you did, but there's someone here who doesn't like seeing you rise so quickly." David leaned forward, his voice lowering. "There's someone who's been making moves behind the scenes to undermine you." Her heart raced. "Who?" David hesitated. "Carmen Albright." Carmen Albright. Sarah had heard the name before. Carmen was one of Trump's senior executives, known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude. She had been a fixture at Trump Tower for years, climbing the ranks with an intensity that earned her respect, but also a reputation for being ruthless. Sarah had always tried to stay out of Carmen's orbit, knowing that the woman could be intimidating, but now, it seemed, Carmen was more than just a shadow on the edges of Sarah's career. "What's she doing?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "She's working against you, Sarah. Quietly, but effectively." She's spreading rumors, questioning your decisions, even questioning your loyalty to the company. She doesn't think you belong here." David's words were blunt, but they stung. Sarah's mind raced, processing the information. Why? What had she done to earn Carmen's ire? She had always been respectful, always tried to prove herself through hard work, not backstabbing or politics. She had thought that, perhaps, Carmen might see her as a rival, but never an enemy. Why would she do this? Sarah muttered, her voice more to herself than to David. "I've barely even spoken to her." David sighed. "It's not about you personally. It's about power. Carmen has been at Trump Tower for a long time, and she's seen a lot of people come and go. She doesn't like new people making waves, especially when those people are climbing as fast as you are. You've become a threat, Sarah. A threat." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had only been trying to succeed, to prove that she belonged in this world. She hadn't realized that her rise might have made others feel threatened. "So what now?" Sarah asked, struggling to keep her composure. "How do I handle this?" David looked at her seriously. "You have to be careful. If Carmen is working against you, it's not going to be easy to stop her. She's not someone who plays fair. You'll need to be strategic. Take a step back, keep your ear to the ground, and watch your back. Don't make any hasty moves." Sarah nodded, though her thoughts were a jumbled mess. The last thing she wanted was to retreat, to let someone like Carmen control her destiny. But David was right. She had to be smart. She couldn't afford to make a mistake now, not when everything was at stake. The next few days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Sarah was hyper-aware of Carmen's presence at the office, always watching from the edges, always keeping her distance. But Sarah could feel the weight of Carmen's eyes, the silent judgment. It was as though the older woman were always lurking just behind her, ready to strike when she least expected it. Sarah tried to focus on her work, to push through the discomfort, but it was hard. The subtle sabotage that David had warned her about had already begun. There were whispers in the hallways, vague comments from people who used to be friendly, and even some passive-aggressive emails sent her way. No one came out and said it outright, but Sarah could feel the shift in the air. It was as if her success was no longer something people celebrated. It was something they feared. One afternoon, as she was walking out of the conference room after a presentation, she spotted Carmen talking to another executive. Their conversation stopped abruptly when Sarah entered the hallway, and for a moment, Carmen's eyes locked with hers. The look was cold, calculating. "I hear you've been making quite an impression," Carmen said, her voice laced with subtle mockery. "It's impressive, really. You must have a lot of ambition." Sarah forced herself to smile, but it felt like a thin veil over her growing anxiety. "I'm just doing my job." Carmen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Keep doing that, then. Just remember, in this business, it's not always the hardest worker who wins. It's the one who knows how to play the game." With that, Carmen turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. Her mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. Carmen had made her move, clear and calculated. The warning was unmistakable. Sarah had to play by Carmen's rules, or she would be crushed underfoot. But Sarah wasn't sure if she was even capable of playing that kind of game. She had never been one for manipulation or deceit. She had always believed in the value of hard work, of earning her place through sheer determination. But now, she was beginning to understand that in this world, hard work wasn't always enough. There were other forces at play, forces that could destroy everything she had built. Her phone buzzed again, breaking her train of thought. It was a message from Trump. "Sarah, I've been hearing good things. You've shown a lot of promise. But I also know that there's a lot of noise around you. Keep your head down and keep delivering results. The real test comes when you're up against people who want to see you fail. Stay focused and don't let them get to you. You're doing great." His words were comforting, but they also added to the pressure. The real test. Sarah was beginning to understand exactly what he meant. She was no longer just fighting for success. She was fighting for survival. But she wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. The following days felt like walking through a storm. Every moment in Trump Tower, every phone call, every email, Every glance in the hallway seemed to be wrapped in a new layer of tension. Carmen Albright was always there, somewhere in the background, like a shadow that refused to fade. The subtle sabotage continued, whispers in the office growing louder, snide remarks being made just loud enough for Sarah to hear. And with every passing day, the weight of her position seemed heavier. But amidst the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope. Donald Trump's words had stuck with her. "You're doing great." She couldn't afford to forget that. She couldn't let Carmen, or anyone else, distract her from the bigger picture. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, and come too far to let herself be intimidated. The problem, however, was that Sarah didn't know how to fight back. She had always been honest, driven by the desire to do her best and prove herself through action. But now, it felt like the game had changed. It wasn't just about the work anymore. It was about surviving in a ruthless, dog-eat-dog world, where alliances were just as important, if not more so, than talent. One evening, as Sarah worked late in her office, she received an unexpected call. It was from David. "Sarah, you've been working hard. I can see that," David began, his voice a bit more distant than usual. "But there's something I need to tell you." "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. "I'm hearing that Carmen is ramping up her efforts. She's been making moves to undermine your position. She's talking to the higher-ups, trying to discredit you," David said, his tone serious. "I don't want to scare you, but you need to be aware that if this continues, it could escalate. And when it does, it won't be pretty." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What should I do?" David paused before responding. "You need to make a choice. You can continue doing things the way you've been doing them, focused on your work, staying out of the drama, but that means you'll be a target. Carmen won't let up, and you'll always be under fire. Or you can fight back. Play the game. Use your position and influence. It might not be comfortable, but it's how this world works. You can't afford to be passive anymore." Sarah took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. The idea of playing the game, the manipulative, cutthroat game that David was suggesting, felt foreign to her. She had never been that kind of person. But what other choice did she have? Her back was against the wall, and every day she waited was a day Carmen's influence grew stronger. "You've got to think about it, Sarah. Time's ticking. You've got a window of opportunity, but it's closing fast." The phone call ended, and Sarah was left alone with her thoughts. She stared at the empty desk in front of her, the files and documents scattered across it, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in as she wrestled with her choices. Was she really prepared to abandon everything she had believed in? Could she really play Carmen's game, fight dirty, and still come out on top? Or was there another way, one that wouldn't compromise who she was? As the hours passed, Sarah could feel herself growing more and more conflicted. She was being pulled in two directions. On one hand, there was the temptation of power, the chance to stand her ground and prove she was just as capable, just as ruthless as anyone else in the room. On the other hand, there was the fear of losing herself in the process. She had worked so hard to get here, but what if the price of success was too high? The next morning, she arrived at Trump Tower earlier than usual. Her mind was still racing with the decision she had to make, and the thought of facing another day of uncertainty was almost unbearable. She had to do something, she realized. She couldn't stay on the sidelines forever, not when the stakes were so high. When Sarah entered the lobby, she was surprised to see Carmen standing near the elevators, speaking with a group of executives. The older woman's back was turned, but Sarah could feel her presence like a cold wind brushing against her skin. Carmen's voice carried clearly through the room. "I don't think she's the right fit for this team," Carmen said, her tone dismissive. "She may have done well in that meeting with Trump, but let's see if she can handle the pressure of the real work. I've seen people like her come and go. They're all flash, no substance." Sarah felt her heart clench at the words. She had no idea that Carmen was so vocal about undermining her. She knew the woman didn't like her, but to hear it spoken so openly felt like a punch to the gut. Without thinking, Sarah walked over to the group of executives, her feet carrying her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. "I heard what you said, Carmen," Sarah said, her voice steady, though her pulse was racing. The executives turned to look at her, surprised by her sudden appearance. Carmen's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, Sarah, I didn't realize you were listening in. But, of course, I'm just being honest about your—" "No, Carmen," Sarah interrupted. Her eyes locked on the older woman's. "I heard exactly what you said, and I think it's time we stop pretending this is just about business." The room went silent. The tension between Sarah and Carmen was palpable, a heavy weight hanging in the air. "You think I don't belong here, don't you?" Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "But let me tell you something, Carmen. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here to stay, and I'm not afraid of you or your little games." For a moment, Carmen said nothing. Her lips twisted into a smile that was anything but kind. "You'll learn," she said coolly. "The real game doesn't have room for people like you. But fine, keep fighting. I'd like to see how long that lasts." With that, Carmen turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floors. The executives, who had been watching the exchange, slowly began to disperse, but not before exchanging uncertain glances with each other. Sarah stood there, her heart still pounding, but a sense of pride swelling in her chest. She had stood up for herself. It felt good, too good. But even as the adrenaline subsided, a part of her wondered if she had just made a grave mistake. Later that day, Sarah received another message from David. "Well done, but be careful. You've just made an enemy of one of the most powerful people in the room. This battle is far from over." Sarah stared at the message, the weight of David's words sinking in. She had taken her stand, but now, the real war was just beginning. The days that followed Sarah's confrontation with Carmen were tense, filled with an undercurrent of suspicion and whispered rumors that seemed to spread faster than wildfire. Every glance in the hallway, every email, every subtle shift in behavior seemed to be a sign of something bigger at play. The executives who had once been warm and collegial now barely acknowledged her. The pressure was mounting. Sarah had done what she thought was necessary, taken a stand, let Carmen know she wasn't afraid. But now, the consequences of that decision were beginning to unfold. It started with the small things: emails being delayed, key meetings getting rescheduled without her knowledge, and even a few critical calls from clients going unanswered. At first, she told herself it was just coincidence, that maybe it was just the pace of the job catching up with everyone. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. Carmen's influence was reaching further than Sarah had anticipated, and she was starting to feel the full force of it. It was a Friday afternoon when it all came crashing down. Sarah had just wrapped up a long meeting with a high-profile client when she received an email from David. The subject line was simple: "We need to talk." Her stomach twisted. The message was direct and to the point, but it carried an ominous tone that set her nerves on edge. She had been expecting something like this. After all, things had been building for weeks now, but the reality of the situation was starting to sink in. She immediately called David's office. "David, it's Sarah. You wanted to talk?" David's voice came through the phone, low and serious. "Yes, Sarah. We need to meet. It's about the situation with Carmen." Sarah's heart sank. She knew this wasn't going to be good news. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. When she arrived at David's office, the atmosphere was thick with tension. David stood by the window, staring out over the city, his posture stiff. There was something in the way he held himself, something that told Sarah that whatever he was about to say, it was serious. "Sarah," he began, turning to face her, "I've been hearing some troubling things. Carmen's retaliation has already begun. I don't think you realize how deep her influence runs around here." Sarah's mind raced. "What do you mean? What's happening?" David's expression was grim. "I've been getting reports from the higher-ups. A few of your recent projects have been flagged. There's talk of you being inefficient, unreliable, and some of it's coming from people you've worked with directly. They're starting to question your judgment, your loyalty." Sarah shook her head, trying to make sense of it. "But that's not true. I've been putting in the work, staying late, handling the clients. Everything's been going well." David exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I know, Sarah. I know you've been doing great work. But in this world, it doesn't always matter how hard you work. It's about the perception, the alliances. Carmen's been planting seeds of doubt, subtly but effectively. And now, those seeds are starting to bloom. Is it too late? Sarah asked, her voice tight with frustration. Can't we stop it? We can expose this, right? David looked at her, his gaze filled with empathy, but there was a certain resignation in it, too. It's complicated. Carmen's too entrenched. Going after her head-on is dangerous. If we do that, we risk alienating ourselves from the people who could help you climb higher here. Right now, you're walking a fine line. The words hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. She had been warned. But hearing David confirm it in such blunt terms, how vulnerable she was, how much of a target she had become, was like a punch to the gut. So, what should I do? Sarah asked quietly, her voice betraying a hint of defeat. Just lie low and take it? David shook his head. No, you can't just sit back and hope it'll get better. But you need to be strategic. Carmen has a lot of power here, but she also has weaknesses. You have to find a way to turn the situation in your favor. You need to make moves, but you need to make them carefully. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing everything David was saying. Her heart was racing, her thoughts tumbling over each other. Turn the situation in her favor? How could she possibly do that without stooping to the same level of manipulation and deceit that Carmen used? But before Sarah could ask another question, her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. She opened it, her eyes scanning the screen. I know what you did. Be careful. Carmen isn't the only one who's been watching you. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Who had sent this? And what did they mean by, I know what you did? Had Carmen been working with someone else? Was there someone else conspiring against her? I have to go, Sarah said abruptly, her voice shaky. I'll figure it out, David. I have to. David gave her a long look, as if he wanted to say more, but he said nothing. He simply nodded, his expression hardening. Be careful, Sarah. You're in deeper than you think. Sarah walked out of David's office, the weight of the conversation settling heavily on her shoulders. The air felt thicker, more oppressive, as if the building itself were closing in on her. She barely noticed the elevator ride down to the lobby, or the people she passed on the way out. All she could think about was the cryptic message she had received. I know what you did. The words echoed in her mind like a warning bell. What did they mean? Was someone else watching her? Someone else who knew about her confrontation with Carmen? Sarah didn't have time to dwell on it. She had to find out who had sent the message, and quickly. Her mind raced through possibilities. Was it someone inside the company? Someone loyal to Carmen? Or was it someone who was just watching the drama unfold from the sidelines? As she stepped outside into the cold air, Sarah pulled her jacket tighter around her, trying to steady her breathing. There was no turning back now. The stakes had grown higher, the enemies more elusive, and every move she made from this point on would determine not just her future, but her survival. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and endless messages. Sarah had barely slept since that cryptic text, and the uncertainty gnawed at her like a constant ache. Every time her phone buzzed, she braced herself for bad news or another threat. But the one thing that remained clear in her mind was this. She couldn't face this alone. Carmen was too powerful, too strategic, and if Sarah was going to make it out of this unscathed, she needed an ally, someone she could trust. The problem was, finding someone trustworthy was a challenge in a place like Trump Tower, where loyalty was as elusive as a shadow, and betrayal often came with a smile. But the text had been a warning, not a threat. It had felt personal, as if whoever had sent it had seen through the entire game. And perhaps, just perhaps, that person could help her turn the tables on Carmen. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before picking up. Hello? She answered, her voice cautious. Sarah. The voice on the other end was low but urgent. It's David Miller. David? Sarah frowned. She hadn't spoken to David in days. Where have you been? What's going on? I've been keeping my distance for a reason, David said, sounding tense. I've been watching the situation, and things have gotten much worse than I anticipated. I've also been trying to reach you, but your phones are being monitored. Your texts, emails, everything. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Monitored? What do you mean? David's voice dropped to a whisper. It's not just Carmen. There's someone higher up, the board members, even people in the legal team. They've all been in on it, watching your every move. Carmen is just a pawn in a bigger game, and they've been using her to isolate you. Her heart raced. Who was behind this? The realization struck her like a thunderclap. It wasn't just Carmen who was after her. It was the entire system, the very people she trusted, the ones who controlled the company she had poured her soul into. But then David added something that caught her off guard. I know you're being targeted, Sarah, but I'm willing to help you. We can work together. I can show you how to play the game, how to turn the board in your favor. Sarah's mind spun. David was offering help, but could she trust him? Her instincts told her she had no other choice. But her caution made her pause. Why should I trust you? She asked, her voice shaking slightly despite her best efforts to keep calm. David chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. Because I've been where you are. I've been the underdog, the target, and I know exactly how these people think. If you don't play their game, they'll bury you. I'm not saying you have to become one of them, but you can't afford to stand on the sidelines anymore. You need to make your move. Sarah took a deep breath. She had no other choice. All right, she said, her voice steady now, filled with determination. Let's do this. But we need to move quickly. Carmen won't stop until I'm gone. Exactly. That's why you need to be ahead of her. I'll meet you at your place tonight. We'll plan your next steps. That night, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, staring out of the window at the city below. She hadn't had a chance to relax since that confrontation with Carmen, and her mind was still racing with all the possible outcomes. What could David offer her? What could he know that would help her get out of this mess? And, more importantly, should she trust him? As the clock ticked past midnight, a knock on the door broke her reverie. Sarah opened it to find David standing there, his face unreadable, a manila folder in his hand. They sat down at her kitchen table, and David spread the contents of the folder out before her. It was a series of documents, emails, meeting minutes, financial reports. But there was one thing that immediately caught Sarah's eye, a list of names. High-profile individuals, board members, and even key investors, all tied to Carmen in some way. They had all signed off on her appointments, approved her decisions, and indirectly endorsed her rise to power. Sarah's heart raced as she scanned the list. You've been collecting intel on them. David nodded. I've been watching, listening, and I found something interesting. Carmen is not as invincible as she thinks. She's playing a dangerous game, but she's not the only one who has leverage here. David's finger landed on one particular name on the list, Charles Richter. This is your key, David said. Richter has a history with Carmen. He's been trying to get her out of the picture for years. If you can get to him, use him, you might be able to turn this situation around. Wait, what? Sarah was confused. Richter? Why would he help me? He's one of them. One of the people I've been fighting against. David's eyes gleamed. Exactly. He's not loyal to Carmen, but he's too smart to let her stay in power. He's been looking for someone to make a move against her, someone who can expose her weaknesses. Sarah's mind raced. This was risky. Using Richter's leverage could either crush Carmen or blow up in her face. But with David's backing, maybe it was worth a try. You think he'll help me? She asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. David gave a short, bitter laugh. I don't think he'll help you, but I do think he'll help himself. And right now, he needs someone who can put the pressure on Carmen. If you approach him right, you could get him on your side, at least temporarily. Sarah's fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. She was being pushed into a corner. There was no easy way out. But for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. She had an ally, someone who knew the rules of the game. And with this new strategy, she might just have a chance to take Carmen down, before Carmen took her down. The next day, Sarah called a meeting with Richter. She had no idea what she was walking into, but the moment she walked into his sleek office, she knew this would be unlike any meeting she'd had before. Richter was a sharp, calculating man, someone who thrived on power, and Sarah wasn't sure how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. But she had one advantage. He wanted to win, and if she could prove to him that taking Carmen down was in his best interest, he might just play along. As she sat down across from him, his eyes narrowed, assessing her carefully. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice smooth but edged with suspicion. "What brings you to my office?" Sarah leaned forward, matching his intensity. "I think we can help each other." Sarah sat across from Charles Richter, her palms sweating despite the cool air in the office. The man had a reputation for being ruthless, a master at navigating the complex, often murky waters of corporate politics. She had no illusions about his motivations. He was not doing this out of some noble sense of justice. No, Richter was a player, and he was playing for his own gain. But if he was willing to play her game, if he was willing to take down Carmen, then maybe, just maybe, she could use him to her advantage. Richter studied her with calculating eyes, as if trying to decide whether she was worth his time, or just another desperate employee looking for an easy way out. He didn't speak for a long moment, and Sarah could feel the weight of the silence pressing on her. "Ms. Thompson," he finally said, his voice smooth like velvet, but with an unmistakable edge, "you've certainly got guts. I'll give you that. Not many people would come to me like this." Sarah leaned forward, keeping her tone steady but firm. "I'm not here to beg for your help, Mr. Richter. I'm here to offer you a deal. You and I both know Carmen is a liability, and the higher-ups are starting to take notice. She's outlived her usefulness, and she's dangerous. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, you'll help me take her down." Richter's lips curled into a half-smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're right about one thing. Carmen is a liability. But I don't take deals from anyone unless they have something to offer me. What do you have that makes you worth my time?" Sarah had anticipated this. She'd come prepared, and now was the time to play her hand. "I have something Carmen doesn't. Leverage. I know things about her, things that could ruin her reputation, destroy her career. I've been watching her closely, and I know what she's hiding. She's been manipulating people, making deals behind closed doors, and I can expose all of it." Richter's interest peaked, but he remained guarded. "Go on," Sarah continued, her voice growing more confident. "I've gathered intel, files, emails, meeting notes. I have evidence of unethical practices, of actions that would lead to her downfall if the right people knew about them. I can give you that evidence, Richter, but only if you help me take her out. The game is shifting. It's time for someone else to take the reins." Richter's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Sarah wasn't sure if he was going to accept her offer or use it against her. He seemed to weigh her words carefully before speaking again. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "You want me to use this evidence to leverage Carmen out of power and help you get ahead? And in exchange, you'll give me this intel to do with as I please?" "Yes," Sarah replied, her tone unwavering. "We both know that in this business, leverage is everything. Carmen's time is up. She's going to fall, whether you help her or not. The question is, do you want to be the one who pulls the rug out from under her?" There was a pause as Richter considered her proposal. Sarah could see the wheels turning in his head, calculating risks and rewards. Finally, he stood up from his desk, walking toward the window to stare out over the city. She held her breath, waiting for his response. "You're right about one thing, Sarah," Richter said, his back still to her. "Carmen's reign is fragile. But you're wrong if you think I'm going to let you dictate how this goes. I'll use your intel, but I'm in charge of how this plays out. Understand?" Sarah's heart raced. This was the moment of truth. Understood. Richter turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. "Good. I'll arrange a meeting with the people who can make this happen. You stay in the background. Let me do the talking. But remember, if this blows up in our faces, it's on you as much as it is on me." "I can handle it," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the rising tension in her chest. Richter's eyes glinted with something akin to amusement. "We'll see. I'll have my people contact you when it's time. Don't make any moves until then." As Sarah stood to leave, Richter added one final thing, his tone no longer a challenge but a warning. "And Sarah, don't think for 1 second that I'm doing this for you. I'm doing this because I want Carmen out, and I want to be the one to take her place. You're just a pawn in this game, same as anyone else." Sarah nodded, feeling a cold shiver run down her spine. She was playing a dangerous game now, and Richter was just as much of a threat as Carmen. But for now, he was her best shot at survival. The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah was careful to stay low, not making any moves without Richter's signal. She spent her time reviewing the evidence she had gathered on Carmen, organizing it in a way that would make it easy to present. But despite the quiet, there was a sense of unease in the air. The corporate world was a pressure cooker, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the lid blew off. She didn't have long to wait. On a Thursday afternoon, her phone rang. It was a message from Richter's assistant. "Meeting tomorrow. Be there at 10 a.m. sharp." Sarah's stomach flipped. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for. She took a deep breath and made her way to the location Richter had given her. A nondescript conference room in a building just outside the main office. It was the kind of place where deals were made in secret, where alliances were formed and broken in the blink of an eye. When she arrived, Richter was already there, standing beside a table covered in files. There were two other men in the room. One was older, dressed in a sharp suit, the other younger but just as well dressed. Both were exuding the kind of power that Sarah recognized all too well. They were players in this world, just like Richter. "Sarah," Richter greeted her with a nod, "these are my associates. They'll be the ones helping us move forward. You have the files?" Sarah nodded, pulling the manila folder from her bag and handing it to him. Richter glanced through the documents briefly before setting them down on the table. "We'll need to move quickly," the older man said. "Once we leak this information, there's no going back. Carmen will retaliate, and so will her supporters." "Then we make sure there's no way for her to come back," Richter replied, his voice cold. Sarah's heart was pounding. The walls of this room felt like they were closing in on her, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her chest. She had no illusions now. This was no longer about revenge. It was about survival. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Do you think Sarah can really trust Richter and his associates, or is she walking into a trap? What's her next move in this high-stakes game? The clock on the wall ticked ominously as Sarah sat across from Charles Richter and his two associates, her hands gripping the edges of her chair. The air in the small conference room felt thick with tension, the kind that only came when deals of this magnitude were being made. Every word, every glance, carried weight. There was no room for mistakes. And Sarah knew that in this game, one wrong move could cost her everything. She had come to the meeting hoping for clarity, hoping for some way out of the tangled web she'd found herself in. But as Richter and his associates pored over the evidence she'd given them, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled deeper into a game she might not be able to control. Richter glanced at the documents she'd provided, and then at his associates. The older man, Robert Hayes, as he introduced himself, nodded in approval, while the younger one, Jason Keller, remained silent, his cold eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "This is interesting," Richter said, his voice neutral, though there was an edge of excitement beneath it. "Carmen's always been careful, but this is a mistake. She's been sloppy. If this information gets out, her career will implode." Sarah's heart raced as she tried to read Richter's intentions. He wasn't just playing this for her benefit, he was playing it for himself. The question was, would he honor his part of the deal once they took down Carmen? "And what's your plan for getting this out there?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the uncertainty from her voice. "You'll need more than just this evidence to bring her down. There's too much at stake for her to just fold." Richter's lips curled into a thin smile. "That's where you come in, Sarah." Sarah's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You're the one she trusts," Richter continued, his eyes sharp. "You're already inside. If you can get her alone, force her into a corner, we can make sure the world knows exactly what she's been doing." Sarah's pulse quickened. The thought of confronting Carmen in such a direct way made her stomach twist with anxiety, but it was also the perfect opportunity. If she played her cards right, this could be the turning point, the chance to take back control of her life, of her future. But something nagged at her, a gut feeling she couldn't shake. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice low and cautious. The room grew still, and Sarah could feel Richter's gaze sharpen. "The catch, Miss Thompson, is simple," Richter said, his tone suddenly colder. "We're not just taking down Carmen for the sake of it. I don't do favors, and I don't work with people who don't understand that loyalty in this game is everything. If you want my help, you need to prove you're not a liability." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had expected something, but not this. What do you mean, prove I'm not a liability? You need to show me that you're willing to play the game, fully. No more hesitation. No more second-guessing. We're moving forward with this, and if you falter, you're out. Richter's eyes locked on hers, the meaning behind his words clear. There was no room for weakness, no space for indecision. Sarah swallowed hard, her mind racing. There was no turning back now. She had already crossed a line by coming this far. If she backed out now, she'd lose everything, and so would her chance to take Carmen down. I understand, she said quietly, though her heart was pounding in her chest. Richter gave her a slight nod. Good. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get Carmen to meet you. We'll arrange a private meeting. When you're alone with her, you'll confront her with this evidence. Push her into a corner. Force her to choose. Either she goes down, or you do. The words hung in the air like a threat. Richter wasn't asking her to just confront Carmen. He was asking her to destroy her, and in doing so, destroy any hope Sarah had of coming out of this unscathed. Do you think I'm ready for that? Sarah asked, her voice shaking slightly despite her best efforts to sound confident. Richter leaned back in his chair, his eyes studying her. I think you're smarter than you let on. You don't get this far in this world without knowing how to play the game. I'll be in the background, but this is your move. You have to decide, are you in or are you out? Sarah had no choice. She was already in too deep. The risk of backing out now was too great. She needed to end this, and she needed to end it on her terms. I'm in, she said, her voice steady, her resolve hardening. Let's do this. The next 24 hours felt like a blur. Sarah spent the rest of the day and night preparing for the confrontation with Carmen. She couldn't afford to make a single mistake. This was her chance to destroy the woman who had been behind her downfall, the woman who had nearly ruined her career and her life. Richter's team worked fast. They arranged the meeting between Sarah and Carmen under the guise of a private discussion about the future of the company. Carmen, ever confident, didn't suspect a thing. She thought she was still in control, too arrogant to realize that her empire was crumbling beneath her feet. At 9 a.m. the next day, Sarah received a message, meeting at 11 o'clock. Private room. Be there on time. It was Richter's final instruction. The time had come. Sarah arrived at the meeting room early, her nerves in overdrive. She could hear the faint hum of voices outside the door, but she couldn't focus on anything except the task ahead. Carmen was on her way, and once she walked through that door, everything would change. When Carmen entered the room, she was as poised and arrogant as ever, her expression filled with superiority. Sarah forced herself to remain calm, to keep her emotions in check. She couldn't let Carmen see any hint of fear. Sarah, Carmen said, her voice dripping with condescension. What's this about? I'm busy. I don't have time for your games. Sarah stood, her back straight, her hands steady as she placed the folder on the table in front of her. It's not a game, Carmen. This is about you and your future. Carmen raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. My future? What is this about, Sarah? Sarah took a deep breath, her heart hammering in her chest. This was it. She opened the folder, placing the incriminating documents on the table between them. You've been playing a dangerous game, Carmen, and it's about to catch up to you. Carmen's face froze, her eyes flicking from the documents to Sarah. The color drained from her face as she saw the evidence. Proof of her corruption, her manipulations, her lies. Sarah had done her homework, and now Carmen was staring at the consequences. For a long moment, Carmen didn't say anything. The room was silent, tense with the weight of the moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice shaking slightly but still filled with venom. You think this will stop me? You think you can destroy me with a few papers? Carmen's laugh was cold, bitter. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I think I do, Sarah replied, her voice steady. And it's over, Carmen. You've lost. Carmen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Sarah saw the woman behind the power. Someone desperate, someone who knew she was cornered. But Carmen wasn't done yet. This isn't over, Carmen hissed. You don't know what you're doing. You're playing a game you don't understand. You think you're winning? You're just another pawn. Sarah stood tall, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. Then let's see how this game ends. The door clicked shut behind Carmen with a soft thud, leaving Sarah standing alone in the quiet room. The evidence was on the table, the battle lines drawn. Carmen's words echoed in her mind. You're just another pawn. But Sarah wasn't just a pawn. Not anymore. Yet as she stared at the folder, the documents that could bring down the woman who had tormented her for months, Sarah couldn't shake the sinking feeling that something wasn't right. The moment Carmen had walked out, Sarah had realized just how much she was losing in this game. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. She stood in the silence of the room for what felt like hours, the weight of her decision heavy on her chest. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced down. It's done. Meet me in 30 minutes. Same place. See. It was Richter. The anxiety that had been bubbling in Sarah's stomach now surged to the surface. She had played her part, but now, the next steps were out of her hands. And something told her she was about to face the consequences of trusting the wrong people. 30 minutes later, Sarah entered the same private room, her mind racing. Charles Richter stood by the window, his back to her as he looked out over the city. Robert Hayes was sitting at the table, flipping through some papers, while Jason Keller remained at the door, his eyes scanning the room as if waiting for something to happen. The tension in the room was palpable. You've done well, Sarah, Richter said without turning around. His voice was smooth, almost soothing, but Sarah knew better than to let her guard down. Done well? She asked, trying to keep the uncertainty from creeping into her voice. Carmen's not done yet. She's dangerous, and she won't go down without a fight. Richter finally turned to face her, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Don't worry about Carmen. She's already sealed her fate. But you've done exactly what we needed. You gave us the leverage. Sarah's stomach churned. She didn't like where this was going. What do you mean we needed? She asked carefully. This was supposed to be about taking Carmen down. It's about more than just her, Richter said, his eyes narrowing. Carmen's fall is only the beginning. You see, Sarah, you've done your part. But now, the real game starts. Sarah's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. She had given them the evidence they needed to take Carmen down. But that wasn't enough. Not for Richter. He wasn't in this for the same reasons she was. You're using me, she said flatly, her voice trembling with the realization. You never intended to take Carmen down. You wanted leverage for something else. Richter stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. You're not as naive as I thought. Of course, I'm using you. Everyone in this game uses someone. You used Carmen. I'm using you. It's how things work. Sarah felt a coldness creep up her spine. What do you want from me, Richter? Your loyalty, he said simply. And when Carmen is out of the picture, you'll be the one I turn to. You'll take her place. The power, the influence, it's all there for the taking. All you need to do is accept your role. Sarah blinked, her mind reeling. She had never thought of herself as someone who craved power. She just wanted to survive, to rebuild her life. But now, Richter was offering her a seat at the table, a chance to take everything Carmen had worked for. And that thought, though tempting, made her feel more sick than anything. You think I want to be like her? Sarah asked, incredulous. I'm not playing that game. Richter's smile faded, his expression hardening. You're already in it, Sarah, whether you want it or not. All I'm offering is the chance to come out on top. You think you can walk away? You think you can just play the hero here and then go back to your quiet little life? That's not how this works. For a moment, Sarah said nothing. She couldn't deny the allure of Richter's offer. Power, influence, the opportunity to finally get what she had always deserved. But something inside her recoiled at the thought of becoming just another piece in this ruthless game. I didn't ask for this, she said softly, her voice more to herself than to anyone in the room. You didn't have to ask, Richter replied, his voice cold and final. But you've made your choice. Now, we move forward. There's no going back. It was late afternoon by the time Sarah left the meeting. Her mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions, each one pulling her in a different direction. She had trusted Richter to help her take down Carmen, but now she realized that trust had come at a price. Richter had never been interested in justice. He'd only wanted to seize power, and now he was trying to recruit her as an ally. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Had she really taken down Carmen for the right reasons? Was she any different from the people she had despised? As she walked out of the building, she felt a chill in the air. The city around her seemed distant, as if it were no longer her home. Every street, every familiar building, felt alien. She was standing on the edge of a precipice, and the question was no longer whether she could take down Carmen, but whether she could walk away from everything this game demanded. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Richter. "We move tomorrow. Be ready." No more hesitation. But how could she be ready? How could she trust a man like Richter? How could she continue down this path when she knew it was leading her further into a world of manipulation, lies, and broken promises? Later that night, Sarah lay awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed the events of the day, the confrontation with Carmen, the chilling meeting with Richter. But even more, it replayed the realization that she was caught in a game that had no rules, no honor, and no winners. She had wanted to take Carmen down, yes, but now, the lines between right and wrong were becoming increasingly blurred. The more she played, the more she risked losing herself in the process. The morning light streamed through the curtains, casting long shadows across Sarah's apartment. She had barely slept, her mind caught in a storm of indecision. Richter's offer echoed in her head, each word pressing harder than the last. She had been given a choice, a chance at power, influence, and revenge. But was that really what she wanted? Her phone buzzed again, this time an ominous message from Jason Keller. "Meeting at noon. Same place. Be there." It was like the final push, the last nudge before the plunge. Sarah knew there was no way out anymore. Not without consequences. And the question still lingered. Could she walk away from this world? Or was she already too far gone? By noon, Sarah found herself back in the same private meeting room with Richter, Hayes, and Keller. The atmosphere was colder this time, the walls closing in. She took her seat, her thoughts racing, trying to prepare for whatever was coming next. She had been through too much to let fear control her now. She had to keep her composure. Richter was the first to speak, his eyes dark with intent. "It's time to move. Carmen's been cornered. She's starting to panic. The evidence is out there now, and her whole world's about to come crashing down." Sarah's stomach twisted at the thought of Carmen's downfall. It wasn't just about taking Carmen down anymore. It was about everything that had followed after. About how Richter was using her as his pawn, and how she was starting to lose sight of who she was. But she couldn't stop now, not with everything at stake. "And what happens to me?" Sarah asked, her voice steady, though her insides were anything but. "You're in this now, Sarah," Richter replied, his smile cold but confident. "You're part of the plan. We need you to get close to Carmen. You need to push her into a corner. Get her to make a choice. Once she's finished, you'll take over. The power will be yours." His words felt like a weight in her chest. She had always wanted to escape the grasp of people like Richter and Carmen, but now, she was becoming exactly what she had feared. She had no choice but to go along with it, for now. "Once Carmen is out of the picture," Richter continued, his gaze piercing, "you'll have what's rightfully yours. The company, the influence, the control." Hayes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You'll be the one who makes the real decisions. You won't just be another face in the crowd, Sarah. This is your chance to step up. But it all starts with Carmen. Once she's gone, everything is yours." Sarah's mind spun. She had known Richter would want more than just Carmen's downfall, but hearing it out loud made it feel real, too real. The ambition in their eyes, the gleam of success in their voices. It felt like a trap she had been walking into without realizing it. But she had made her choice. There was no going back now. The deal had already been made. The next few days passed in a blur of tension. Sarah spent her time preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Carmen. She had to play her part to get Carmen to trust her one last time. Richter's team had set everything up, from the location to the timing. The moment was coming, and there was no room for hesitation. She met with Carmen under the guise of discussing the fallout from the evidence, just the two of them in a secluded office downtown. Sarah's heart raced as she watched Carmen enter, her usual arrogant confidence masking the uncertainty that Sarah could now see beneath her hardened exterior. "You wanted to talk?" Carmen asked, her tone sharp. She hadn't changed. Still the same powerful woman who had nearly destroyed Sarah's career. But now, there was something else in her eyes. Something brittle. Something close to fear. Sarah nodded, trying to keep her voice even. "I think we need to have a conversation. About what happens next." Carmen's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly do you mean by that, Sarah?" Sarah placed the folder on the desk between them, the same one that had contained the damning evidence. Carmen's gaze dropped to it, and Sarah saw the flicker of recognition. The same shock, the same denial, the same struggle to keep control. "You know what this is," Sarah said, her voice cold. "I've done my part. You don't have any more time. It's over." Carmen stood still for a moment, her back straight, her face composed. But Sarah could see the tremor in her hands, the way her breath became shallow. Carmen wasn't invincible anymore. "You think this will work?" Carmen's voice shook, but she didn't break. "You think this will bring me down? You think you're the one who can do that?" "I don't think it's me who's bringing you down," Sarah said, her gaze unwavering. "It's you. You've played this game too long. And now it's over." Carmen's lips curled into a bitter smile, but there was no humor in it. "You think you can win by taking me out? You're just like everyone else, Sarah. You'll end up just like me. Power is a drug, and once you take it, you'll never walk away." The words hit harder than Sarah expected. She had always known Carmen was ruthless, but hearing her speak about power in such cold terms made Sarah question everything she had done so far. Was she really any better than Carmen? Was she just playing a different version of the same game? But there was no time to dwell on the question. The clock was ticking, and Richter's plan was in motion. "I'm not you, Carmen," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady, despite the uncertainty gnawing at her. "And I'm not going to end up like you. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do." Carmen's eyes gleamed with a dark intensity. "You think you can take me down because it's the right thing to do?" "That's what I thought too. I thought I was doing the right thing, playing the game. But trust me, Sarah, in the end, the game doesn't care about who's right. It only cares about who wins." Suddenly, Sarah realized the magnitude of what Carmen was saying. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't about the fallout from the evidence, or even the company. It was about something bigger, the system that had created both Carmen and Sarah, the same system that had shaped their decisions, their ambitions, and their choices. Sarah hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her mind. Was Richter the answer? Or was he just another cog in the same machine? As she left the meeting, Sarah felt the weight of Carmen's words lingering in her mind. The path she was on no longer felt like it was leading her to justice. It felt like it was leading her into darkness. And now, as the game reached its breaking point, Sarah had to ask herself, could she escape it, or had she already lost? The night was heavy with rain, and the city streets glistened under the streetlights, reflecting Sarah's inner turmoil. As she sat in her car, parked a few blocks from the meeting location, her thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and doubt. Carmen's last words echoed in her mind. The game doesn't care about who's right. It only cares about who wins. Was she already too far into the game to escape? Was she willing to become just like Carmen? Or worse, like Richter, calculating, manipulative, and power-hungry? She had always prided herself on being different from these people, but now, as she sat on the edge of it all, the line between right and wrong was blurring. She had been playing this game for so long, inching closer to a power she didn't even fully understand. But tonight, the stakes were different. She was supposed to meet with Richter. Everything had been arranged, the move was set, and Carmen was cornered. But Sarah knew that once the game had started, there was no going back. Her phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a message from Richter. "Are you ready?" No, she wasn't ready. But Sarah didn't have the luxury of hesitation anymore. Not when everything she had worked for was on the line. She took a deep breath, wiped the rain from the windshield, and pulled away from the curb. The meeting was held in a sleek, high-rise building, one of Richter's many safe houses. Inside, the cold, sterile atmosphere matched the severity of the situation. Sarah walked into the room where Richter, Hayes, and Keller were already seated. Jason's eyes locked onto her immediately, his usual steely gaze unreadable. "You're late," Richter said, but there was no malice in his tone. He gestured to the chair next to him. "Sit. It's time to move forward." Sarah took a seat, her hands clammy, her heart racing. She forced herself to breathe slowly, focusing on the task ahead. But despite her outward calm, her mind was reeling. Carmen was on the verge of collapse, and now Sarah was being asked to make a choice that would change everything. Hayes didn't waste time. "We've got the final pieces in place. The meeting's set. Carmen will be dealt with in the next 24 hours. But we need you to get her into position. You're the only one who can break her now." Sarah swallowed, trying to steady her nerves. "What do you want me to do?" Richter's eyes softened, almost kindly, though Sarah could tell it was an act. "We need her to trust you completely. She's desperate. She'll come to you for help. All you need to do is convince her it's over, that the only way out is to surrender." "Then what?" Sarah asked, her voice quieter than usual. "What happens to her after that?" Keller leaned in, his face grim. "She's a liability. You know that. She can't be allowed to walk free. But once she's out of the way, Sarah, it's your turn. You'll take over. The company, the influence, it'll all be yours. All we need is your cooperation." The weight of their words pressed down on Sarah. Her thoughts raced, but she kept her face expressionless. "You're in control. Don't show weakness." But there was a deeper question gnawing at her. Did she want this? Did she really want the power they were offering? And if she didn't, what was the price of walking away now? If she couldn't play the game, could she leave it without getting burned? That night, Sarah made her way to Carmen's apartment. She had no illusions that it would be an easy conversation. Carmen was cornered, and when someone like Carmen was cornered, she became dangerous. But Sarah had one advantage. She knew Carmen, and Carmen, for all her power and ruthlessness, didn't understand the new version of Sarah that had emerged in the last few months. She knocked on the door and waited. A moment later, it opened, and Carmen stood there, her face gaunt, her eyes shadowed with fear. But she didn't show weakness. She never did. "Sarah," Carmen said, her voice low but steady. "I didn't think you'd come." "I had to," Sarah replied, her voice flat. "We need to talk." They walked into the living room, and Sarah watched as Carmen gestured toward the couch. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. Carmen was the first to speak. "I know why you're here. I know what you think I've done, but I didn't deserve any of this. You don't know what it's like to be at the top, to have to do things to survive." Sarah felt a pang of empathy. She had spent months trying to bring Carmen down, trying to expose her for all the harm she'd caused. But now, sitting in front of her, she saw a different side. The fear, the exhaustion, the vulnerability that Carmen had so carefully hidden for so long. But Sarah couldn't let herself feel sorry for her. Not anymore. Not when there was so much at stake. "I know what it's like to be pushed to the edge," Sarah said quietly. "I know what it's like to fight for survival, to feel like there's no way out. But there is always a way out. You just have to stop playing the game." Carmen looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You think I can just walk away? You think it's that easy?" "I'm not asking you to walk away," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I'm asking you to face the consequences of your choices. You've manipulated, lied, and destroyed so many people to get where you are. And now it's time to pay the price." Carmen's expression twisted, her calm facade cracking. "And you think you're better than me? You think you can just walk away from this? You're already in it, Sarah. You've crossed the line, and you can't come back. You're just as much a part of this as I am." Sarah's pulse quickened. Carmen's words hit too close to home. Was she right? Had Sarah already crossed the point of no return? But Sarah steadied herself. This was the moment of reckoning. She had to make a choice. She could finish this, take the power, and be the one who came out on top, just like Richter promised. Or she could walk away, if that was even possible, and risk losing everything. Before she could respond, Carmen stood up abruptly, her eyes burning with fury. "You don't get it, do you? You think you're the hero in all this? You think taking me down will make you the good guy? You're wrong. You'll end up just like me. Maybe even worse." Sarah's heart raced, but she stayed silent. Carmen was right about one thing. There was no such thing as an easy answer. No such thing as a clean way out. But the clock was ticking. The game was still in motion, and the choice had to be made. The rain had stopped, but the heavy humidity lingered in the air, clinging to everything around Sarah. She stood by the window, staring out at the city below. Her city, the place where everything had started. But now, it felt like a foreign land, a place she no longer recognized. The weight of the choices before her pressed down harder than ever before. Carmen's words had unsettled her. Had she really already crossed the line? Had she already become a part of this world, this ruthless game of power and deception, in a way that couldn't be undone? No matter how much she told herself she was different from Carmen or Richter, the truth was undeniable. She had made her choices, and now there was no turning back. Sarah glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost time. The meeting was set. Richter would expect her to come through. Jason Keller, too, was counting on her to finish what they had started. She knew what she had to do, or rather, what they expected her to do. But deep down, Sarah wasn't sure she could go through with it. The choice she faced now was not just about revenge. It was about who she had become and who she still had a chance to be. The private conference room was cold, the lights too bright, too sterile. Sarah walked in, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, her expression set in a mask of resolve. Richter and Keller were already seated, their faces unreadable. Hayes was by the door, arms folded, watching her closely, like a hawk awaiting its prey. She sat down, a slight tremor in her hands betraying the calm she tried to project. Richter gave her a quick glance, but didn't speak immediately. Instead, he passed her a manila folder, its contents sealed tight. She took it without hesitation, but her stomach churned as she glanced at the cover page. Carmen's downfall, the final play. "This is it," Richter finally said, his voice smooth but carrying a tone of finality. "Once you make this call, it's over for her. Everything we've worked for comes together." Sarah didn't say anything at first. She opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Photos, timelines, bank transfers, everything that could destroy Carmen. Everything that could guarantee her downfall. But the image that caught her eye wasn't a document or a photo. It was a handwritten note at the bottom of the file. "You have the power. Take it." It was Richter's voice. And for the first time, Sarah understood the gravity of what he was asking her to do. Not just take down Carmen, but to replace her. To step into the very seat of power Carmen had held for so long. She looked up, meeting Richter's gaze, and for a fleeting moment, Sarah saw something in his eyes. Something that resembled a challenge. Keller broke the silence. "You know what we expect, Sarah. You've been with us from the start. Now it's time to finish it." "I'm aware," Sarah replied, her voice sharp. She wasn't sure whether she was convincing herself or them. She glanced down at the folder once more. But in her mind, she wasn't looking at the documents anymore. She was remembering the conversation with Carmen, remembering the fear in her eyes, the exhaustion, the vulnerability that Carmen had kept hidden for so long. And then there was the game she had been playing for so long. Had it really been worth it? She had been so sure, so focused on what she wanted. But now, the stakes felt different. What would she become if she took this step? And what would she lose if she walked away? Without warning, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Carmen. "You don't have to do this. You're better than them. Don't let them win." Sarah's pulse quickened as she stared at the screen. Carmen was reaching out, offering her a lifeline. A way out. But did Sarah even deserve to take it? Hadn't she already betrayed every part of herself just by being here, in this room, with these people? Richter's voice brought her back to reality. "We don't have time for hesitation. We move tonight. The deal's been arranged. You make the call, and it's done." Jason Keller leaned in, his gaze locked on hers. "We're counting on you, Sarah." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. The weight of it all was too much to bear, and for a moment, it felt like the walls of the room were closing in on her. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, blocking out the faces, the expectations. She thought of everything she had fought for, the months of strategy, of pain, of being pushed to the edge. And then there was Carmen's message. "Don't let them win." What was it that Carmen had said to her? You're already in it. Was that the truth? Had she really already lost herself in this fight for power? Had she become just another player in a game she had once vowed to escape? She could feel the familiar pull of power, of control, tugging at her. Richter was offering it to her on a silver platter. All she had to do was take it. All she had to do was make the call. But then she thought of the cost. The people she'd hurt. The ones who had fallen by the wayside in this game of ambition and survival. Had she become so consumed by it all that she couldn't see the destruction in front of her? I'm done, Sarah said, her voice shaking with the decision. The words felt heavy, but they were freeing. I won't do it. The room fell silent, and for a moment, it felt as if the entire world had stopped turning. Richter's eyes narrowed. Keller leaned back in his chair, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. You're backing out? Richter asked, his tone cold but controlled. You can't be serious. I am, Sarah replied, her voice steadying. I'm not going to take this. Not anymore. She pushed the folder aside, standing up slowly. Her knees felt weak, but there was a new strength in her. She was no longer just a pawn in their game. She was something else now, someone who could choose to walk away. Jason Keller stood up, his jaw tightening. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. I'm making the right choice, Sarah replied, her eyes locking with his. This ends now. For me, at least. Richter stood too, his expression unreadable. You're making a dangerous mistake, Sarah. You don't understand what you're throwing away. If you walk away now, you'll lose everything. I'll take that risk, she said, her voice calm but resolute. The game is over for me, and I'm done playing. She turned and walked toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. But with each step, Sarah knew she was reclaiming something precious, her freedom. As she stepped out into the cool night air, Sarah didn't look back. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she would ever be free of the game completely. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control again. The city stretched out before her, alive with possibilities. She wasn't sure where her path would lead, but one thing was clear. The game had ended, and she was no longer a player. The night air felt colder than it should have. It wasn't the kind of cold that came from the weather, but the kind that seeped into your bones, a chill from the inside out. Sarah walked slowly through the empty streets, her steps echoing in the silence. The city that once felt like a battlefield now seemed strangely empty, as though it had lost its vibrancy. And for the first time in months, Sarah wondered if she could ever feel truly alive again. She had walked away. She had made the choice. The decision had been made in the heat of the moment, when Richter's cold, calculating eyes had bored into her soul, when Keller's threats had hung in the air like smoke. But now that she was alone, now that she had broken free, the weight of her decision pressed on her more than she had anticipated. She had told herself she was done with the game, done with the manipulation, the lies, the power plays. But could she really walk away? Was it possible to shed the skin of the person she had become and live a normal life again? The thought was almost laughable. For so long, her life had been defined by power. She had fought tooth and nail to rise, to outsmart, to manipulate, to control. And now, with one decision, she had turned her back on it all. But the question lingered. Was it the right decision? Or had she simply made an irreversible mistake? The next morning, Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it at first, walking through the crowded streets, trying to find a sense of normalcy in the world around her. But the phone continued to buzz, more persistent this time. Finally, she pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A message from Carmen. You're doing the right thing. Don't let them pull you back in. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Carmen, who had been so deeply embedded in the game, was encouraging her? It didn't make sense. The same woman who had tried to destroy her, the same woman who had thrown her into this dangerous world, was now telling her she had made the right call? Sarah's finger hovered over the screen, hesitation tugging at her. Could she trust Carmen? Could she trust anyone now? Before she could think too much about it, another message popped up, this time from Richter. You're making a huge mistake, Sarah. You think you can just walk away from this world, but you're wrong. Once you've been in the game, it's impossible to escape. You'll regret this. Trust me. The threat was clear, but so was the desperation in his words. Richter wanted her back. He needed her back. The power, the control. It was slipping through his fingers, and he would stop at nothing to reclaim it. But Sarah didn't want to be a part of that world anymore. She had seen enough of its darkness to last a lifetime. Her finger hovered over the screen again, this time debating whether or not to respond. But the truth was, there was nothing left to say. Sarah turned off her phone, slipping it back into her pocket. She didn't need to hear their threats anymore. She didn't need to play their game. The moment had passed. Sarah spent the next few days trying to piece her life back together. She stayed at a small, nondescript apartment, far from the high-rise condos and mansions of the people she had once worked with. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. Her days were filled with the mundane. Grocery shopping, cleaning, cooking. It was a rhythm she hadn't known in years, and it felt strangely comforting. But the silence was suffocating at times. The isolation, the absence of the constant adrenaline rush of the game. It felt unnatural. She had no friends left in her life. No connections. The people she had trusted, the people she had fought beside, had all either betrayed her or disappeared into the shadows. The life she had built, the empire she had once been so sure of, was gone. And yet, as she stood in her apartment one evening, looking out at the quiet streets below, Sarah realized something that sent a shiver down her spine. She was free. The cost had been high. The sacrifices had been immense. But she was free. And that, for the first time, made it all feel worth it. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize. Sarah hesitated before answering, the ghost of Richter's threats still fresh in her mind. But she picked up anyway. "Hello?" she said, her voice steady but cautious. "Sarah?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, yet somehow familiar. "This is Hayes. I know you're done with all of it, but you need to know something. The game isn't over. They haven't forgotten about you. Richter's not the only one who's looking for you. There are others. Others who won't stop until they've pulled you back in." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had known this wasn't over. She had known it would follow her, haunt her, for as long as she lived. The game was never truly over. "You don't need to worry about me, Hayes," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "I'm out, and I'm not coming back." There was a pause on the other end. "You may think you're out, but trust me, Sarah. Once you've been in the game, you're always in. They'll come for you. They'll come for everyone you care about. And if you think they won't, you're lying to yourself." Hayes hung up abruptly, and Sarah was left standing there, staring at the phone in her hand. The words reverberated in her mind. Once you've been in the game, you're always in. She knew the truth of it now. There was no real escaping. She had made her choice, but the game was bigger than her. Bigger than Carmen. Bigger than Richter. It was a world that didn't let people go easily. That evening, Sarah walked into a nearby park, the cool air brushing her face. She had no answers, no solutions, but there was one thing she knew for certain. She couldn't hide forever. The game had changed her. It had shaped her into something else, something that couldn't easily be left behind. She sat on a bench, looking out at the empty playground, the swings swaying in the breeze. In that moment, she realized that while she might never truly escape the game, there was still a part of her that had reclaimed her humanity. And maybe that was enough. The future was uncertain. There were still threats lurking in the shadows, still enemies watching from afar. But Sarah was no longer afraid. She would face whatever came her way, no matter the cost. The game was far from over. But this time, it was her move. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Do you think Sarah can truly escape the game? Or will the past always catch up to her? What would you do in her shoes?